How's it going, folks? I'm Des with DesFit, and this is the new Polar Vantage M2 multi-sport watch, the update to the original Vantage M that came out over 2 years ago. With the M2, they updated the software to include a lot of the features that you find on the higher-end Grit X and the Vantage V2, and house that all into an updated design with a new bezel, buttons, as well as a really nice, comfortable strap. The Vantage M2 has a lot of different sport profiles, it can connect to a lot of different external sensors, and it's also one of the lower priced options when it comes to a full-featured multi-sport watch, meaning that it has a full-blown triathlon mode, which allows you to switch easily between a run, bike, and swim, while also being able to track the transitions. So I've been testing the M2 out for quite some time now, and I've got lots of data to share in this in-depth review where I'll be going over all the new features as well as how it performs in the sports and fitness capacity, where I tested it for running, weight training, cycling, swimming, just so you can get a good idea if this device is going to be right for you. And if you do find the information in this video useful, don't be shy about hitting that like button down below, as it definitely helps the channel a lot and I appreciate it. Oh, and I've also been testing out the new Polar Ignite 2, and that in-depth review is coming up, so make sure to subscribe to get a notification when that video drops. Polar made some design changes on the outside of the M2, which I think are pretty stellar. There's a new bezel with this cool pattern on it. There's these color match metal buttons that have a nice texture to them. And it also comes with this new duotone strap, which is super comfortable. And it's also nice and stretchy, which also helps keep the watch more secure on the wrist and prevents it from bouncing around, which can also help get better heart rate accuracy. And more details on heart rate accuracy in just a bit. The M2 uses the same display as the original M, which is an always-on display, which looks great in direct sunlight, so it's super easy to read outdoors, but it's a bit dim indoors, even with the backlight enabled. The M2 uses a 5-button configuration to get around the device, and it doesn't have a touchscreen like its higher-end siblings, but this works just fine for me because I tend to prefer interacting with buttons over a touchscreen, especially in sports and fitness scenarios. And before we get into how the M2 performs in a sports and fitness capacity, let's also do a quick tour of the interface. So Polar has what they call watch face views, which cycle through different screens. Like this first view is just a standard watch face showing the date and the time. If you press the lower right-hand button, it moves to the next view, which shows your activity goal, and then you can press the middle right-hand button to get more details, including your steps and calories burned. The lower left-hand button is the back button, which backs out of the screen. And the next view is your training load status, which currently says that I'm overreaching, which is definitely true since I've been testing so many things lately. Backing out of there, the next view is your current heart rate, where again, you can dive in to see more details. The next screen is your last training session, and you can also see your activity history as well as details on specific activities. Right here is something new with the M2, where it not only shows your calories burned during the workout, but also a breakdown of the energy used with what percentage of that workout used carbs, proteins, and fats. The next screen is for sleep tracking, which is what Polar calls nightly recharge, and this is probably one of my favorite features of the M2. It gives a super detailed breakdown of sleep stats where it provides tons of information, including a sleep score, breakdown of sleep time, sleep continuity, sleep cycles, interruptions. There's really an absolute ton of data to scour over here, and I find the sleep tracking to work very well on Polar devices. The next view is FitSpark, which is a guide to what kind of workout Polar thinks is appropriate for you at any given moment. And this is based on your past training history as well as how well you've recovered during sleep. So since I just got done with a mountain bike ride, FitSpark is suggesting that I do some supportive mobility work, which is appropriate. And what's nice about these suggestions is that when you dive into one of them, it provides a step-by-step guide on how to perform the steps in that workout. The next view is something new with the M2 that came from the Grit X and Vantage V2, which is a weather watch face view. And when you dive in, it provides a lot of weather information, including a forecast ahead, including wind direction and speed, which is very beneficial for me as a cyclist since wind is kind of like kryptonite for me. The next watch face view is also new to the M2, and this is the weekly training summary. It shows a nice color-coded circle indicating time spent in different intensities over the last calendar week, as well as your total training time, mileage, number of activities, calories burned during those activities, a graph showing a breakdown of time spent in different heart rate zones, and then a list of all of those activities. And then you can also view last week's activities and next week's activities if you set up a training plan. And finally, there's also a new music control widget that controls the music that's currently playing on your phone. But just note that the M2 does not have onboard music storage. This is just controlling the music playback on your phone if your phone is in range. Battery life on the M2 is advertised to be up to 7 days, which is up from the 5 days on the original Vantage M, and this is without recording any GPS activities. But let's say you're going to be recording an hour-long GPS activity per day, expect to get about 5 days out of it before you had to place it back on a charger. And then for GPS battery life, it's advertised to get up to 30 hours, and I found that estimate to be pretty accurate. And if you need more battery life, Polar has also added power save options that you can access through the activity settings, which allow you to tweak the settings to get up to 100 hours of battery life, but just note that this will reduce the overall accuracy of the device. For workouts, you can either long press the middle right-hand button to access the list of workout profiles you have loaded on your watch, but you can also short press the lower left-hand button, which brings up a menu of options where you can start training. There's a breathing and relaxation app sort of thing they call Serene. And then here's another feature that makes it down from the Grit X and Vantage V2, which is FuelWise, which provides a way to build smart fueling reminders for longer workouts over 90 minutes, where you can set your predicted intensity level as well as how many carbs per serving you'd prefer. But what's great is that if your workout tends to be more intense than you actually predicted it, it'll actually adapt those reminders as needed. So that's pretty cool. And you can also pair up the smart carb reminders with hydration reminders, which I find to be particularly useful for somebody who oftentimes forgets to hydrate. Then there's timers like a stopwatch and countdown timer, and then here's where you can edit watch face views that you'd like to see or hide, and then there's also a fitness test. And don't worry, this is one of the easiest fitness tests that you'll probably do. All you have to do is relax for about 5 minutes, and it calculates an estimated VO2 max based on your resting heart rate variability, training background, and personal stats, and I find these to be pretty close to the estimated VO2 max that's calculated on some other devices, as well as past tests that I've done in a lab. Super easy peasy. And then finally, there's all the settings like pairing external sensors, do not disturb mode, you can change your personal stats, and then other stuff like alarms, watch faces, and all that good stuff. Okay, so with all that out of the way, now it's time to find out how the M2 performs in sports and fitness capacity. And I've got lots of data to share in terms of both GPS as well as heart rate accuracy. The Vantage M2 comes with the same Precision Prime heart rate sensor that came with the original Vantage M. It's not the newer generation 2.0 sensor that's found in the Grit X or the Vantage V2, but don't worry, I haven't really seen a massive difference in accuracy in the newer sensor versus the one found in the M2. So for running, you can see here from this extremely boring flat as a pancake chart that the M2 did just fine. At the beginning, it was a little slow to ramp up compared to a couple chest heart rate sensors as well as an optical arm heart rate sensor, but this is basically nearly perfect. It's good stuff. For indoor cycling, it was pretty good, but there were a few spots where it jumped slightly, like here, and then a few spots at the end where it dipped, like here and here. But in the whole scheme of things, this is pretty darn good. So taking it outside on a road ride where there's a lot more variables involved, like road vibration and bumps on the road, we do see a bit more variance here where at the beginning it was a bit wonky, but then it got back in line for the first hour or so. On the second half of the ride, we see some dips going on here, but nothing too crazy. But on this portion right here where I stopped for a bit and then got moving again, it had a challenge catching back up, and then it was okay for the last 10 or so minutes. When it comes to heart rate for mountain biking, I generally don't expect great results just because of the nature of the activity where you're gripping onto the handlebars, your wrists are bouncing around a lot because of the rougher terrain, and all that can throw off a wrist-based heart rate sensor. So it was to my utter surprise when I got this result from the M2, which is, again, for mountain biking, a really good result. Sure, there are portions like here and here where it dipped and a few portions where it read a little high, but for mountain biking, this is very usable and I was pretty impressed. Another sport that's challenging for wrist-based heart rate sensors is weight training because there's going to be a lot of gripping, wrist flexion, and a lot of varying arm movement, which again can throw off a wrist-based heart rate sensor. But these were pretty decent results. I generally see results that are pretty wild with crazy spikes and dips everywhere, but the Vantage M2 did a pretty decent job overall. There were a few spots here, and here where it dropped out a bit, but for the rest of the session, it followed along fairly closely, although it's usually about 5 to 8 seconds behind an external heart rate sensor, like on these high-intensity intervals right at the end. Oh, and the Vantage M2 will also collect heart rate in the water for swimming, and it's hard to expect perfection out of a wrist-based heart rate sensor for swimming with the variable of water getting in between the sensor and your skin, but other than the beginning where it took about 40 seconds to ramp up, these results resembled what was being collected on a chest heart rate strap. And one feature that Polar did announce with the M2 that hasn't quite made it into the firmware quite yet is the HR sensor mode, which allows you to broadcast the heart rate that's being collected on the watch to another device like a compatible piece of gym equipment or like an iPad running Zwift. Okay, so to wrap things up, let's also talk about GPS accuracy. So for running, good stuff here where the total distance lined up perfectly compared to some other devices. No worries there. And then the same thing goes for a longer activity here like this road ride. All good stuff. So taking a look at the actual GPS tracks, it looks great from a high level, but let's take a closer look. So on these two corners here and here, the M2 overshot a little bit. On these straight sections, it was really tidy and held strong all the way until I reached this hill climb. This is a moderate to steep hill climb that has a lot of tight switchbacks and tons of turns, so this was a good test for GPS accuracy. For the most part, the M2 did well, but you can see on a few corners it overshot just slightly, and then on this corner it cut in just slightly. Oh, and one last thing is I also did test the M2 on a treadmill to see how well it did at estimating indoor running distances. And I haven't found the indoor running distance estimation on Polar devices to be all that great, but I was pleasantly surprised to see that on this run it was phenomenally close to the treadmill distance. Not sure exactly if they improved the algorithm there, but in any case, that was really nice to see. So to wrap things up, for the sports and fitness performance, I think it did just fine, and I think it's going to be reliable and perform well for lots of different types of sports. The heart rate accuracy, it was pretty good for the most part, and the GPS accuracy was pretty decent, although I would like to see more detail with the GPS tracks. The M2 gives a lot of good feedback with the training load status, the sleep tracking with nightly recharge, as well as training guidance with FitSpark. So if you're into getting training feedback from your device, as well as wanting to dive into lots of nitty-gritty details, this device will be right up your alley. And it is also great that they updated the design, which I think is killer looking, as well as brought in features that were first introduced on the Grit X and the Vantage V2. But I can't help but feel that a little bit more could have been done since the original Vantage M came out over 2 years ago. And I know there's the weekly training summary view, as well as the weather widget and the music controls, but the bulk of that development probably already happened with the Grit X and the Vantage V2. But I do think that the M2 is a good buy, especially at its price point for being a full-featured multi-sport watch that gives a lot of training feedback. And I think it's going to be a really good option for those of you looking for a budget-friendly triathlon watch. But if you're an existing Vantage M owner, you could probably stick with your original Vantage M unless you really like that new design, or you could look into the Grit X or the Vantage V2 that comes with a lot more features, including an altimeter as well as collecting running power from the wrist. Anyhow, if you liked the video or if you found the information in this video useful, make sure to hit that like button down below and also subscribe to the channel for lots more sports tech reviews that are coming soon. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next video.